Well, I want to say that, first of all, I want to thank Marcia for giving me the opportunity to speak, because I think it's very important for us to put Barbados's role in terms of agriculture and to emphasize that, every country in the world today has a role in respect of the agricultural sector. I know
Hmm.
that there are some who it will suit to diminish that role, who
Yep.
would want to say that, for instance, some countries have more of a role than others. But as you highlighted at the beginning of your introduction, where we must recognize that food security is of absolute importance to every country, not only to some and not to others. And we have some challenges that are happening in the international marketplace in terms of, for instance, they were just, I think the FAO had just produced a study that indicates that agricultural land, in other words, land that is there for growing crops, food, basically, is coming under considerable pressure. So, and it is being reduced worldwide. So the whole question of protecting agricultural land worldwide and making sure that we have enough arable land to feed our population is becoming of increasing importance, especially when at the same time you hear other stories. For instance, there was another story in Greece in which they were saying that the amount of land available for instance, agricultural land available in Greece is declining because of some
Wow.
factors that happen over there. So, and even the pace at which agricultural land is being compromised, being converted into other uses, is proceeding at such a pace. And at the same time, we have a situation where we still have hunger in certain parts of the world. In fact, we have, the world's population is expanding. Barbados's population may not be expanding, but the world's population is expanding. And in the face of all of that, Barbadians must see it as a matter of public importance, a priority, national priority, to ensure that we maintain our cultivable lands in a state where, for posterity, for future generations to be able to use, and that we manage our overall land resources in a manner that ensures that our future populations will not be compromised when it comes to the question of food security. That is why sometimes you have to express tremendous concerns when you see the type of advertisements that you get in the press nowadays, where agricultural land is still going up. In other words, there are still people who buy agricultural land for speculative purposes in Barbados. And when they find themselves, they cannot manage the land. Instead of trying to find a way, if the family isn't interested, transfer it to somewhat to a company, institution, or some entity that could better manage that land for agricultural purposes. They choose to cut it up, and for speculative purposes. So, and then you find that that land sometimes does not even benefit the ordinary Barbadian. It benefits foreigners. So these are the issues that we have in our country, that basically we have to develop the type of policies that will facilitate the continued availability of agricultural land. And this is an issue, of course, which we must deal with. And, it is for the future, because you will find yourself, and people say it, but we have to remember it is true. There will come a time when, in some cases, yes, you will have the money to purchase food, but there will be no food to purchase. And remember, one of the other issues that we must recognize, that history should teach us something, that in these situations, the powerful, those who possess power, will have little pity on those who do not have power, and they will
Hmm.
subjugate them,
That's
right?
right.
And,
That's
and,
right.
and we must recognize that that is why it is so important that we have a food security policy. And we must not buy in to the current dogma, where we seem to think that people from another country will feel that they will have some type of responsibility to us. We must first of all show responsibility to ourselves. And that is why it is important that we have a sound and practical environmental management policy that does not compromise our agricultural lands, right, to suit the whims and fancies of those who basically, in some cases, who do not have the ability to manage those lands properly, or in some cases, it is just for speculative interests, where they sell it off to rich foreigners who themselves will be able to come here and live a life of comfort, but sometimes at the expense of our local Barbadian population. And that's the first point I would wish to make on this. The
Well,
other, yes, go ahead.
the question, well, not a question, maybe a comment, or I've observed quite a bit happening around the world. I've observed quite a bit of controversy around agricultural development globally. Of course, I've followed the criticisms of people like Bill Gates buying up all the property, the development of artificial food, from all the way back to artificial beef, to artificial vegetables, and artificial all kinds of things, artificial GMO produced stuff produced in labs, which I hear is happening here. But I am mindful of the fact, James, that for years we have benefited from what I would consider some of the best produce vegetables and agriculture in the world. As a child, I ate local carrots, local yam, local sweet potato, local sugar cane. I mean, you name it, Christophine, all these things we consumed. But when I go into the supermarket, the challenge I see that Bajans have is that based on their reduction of purchasing power, they cannot afford the locally produced agriculture products compared to the imported. Now, I hope that you might be able to give us some insight, because one of the things I have been led to understand is that in many of those countries where we import things from, the agricultural sector is significantly subsidized by the governments. And so they are able to compensate, so to speak, at affordable prices. What is happening within the context of Barbados? And I hope I don't take you too far away from your planned strategy. But what is happening in terms of Barbados when it comes to assisting farmers? And to me, if you're going to give 7.06 acres of land to a bank that building concrete, there must be some capability to give some type of land to farmers to secure the food of Barbados.
All right, let me just say, I don't, I think to be fair, and I like to be fair in these circumstances, we do have a program, an active program for the assistance of farmers in Barbados.
Mm-hmm.
I think what we must recognize, there has to be some form of discipline. And even for instance, the distribution of agricultural land should not be based on those who are able to attract political favors.
Oh,
In other
yes.
words, because of the fact that you are a favorite constituent of a politician, whoever that politician may be, I'm not making any accusations, whoever that politician may be, okay, or because you swear allegiance to a political party or whatever, it does not give you the right to get agricultural land. Not only that, even after receiving the land, you have a responsibility to make sure that you are able to manage the land in the national interest. And what we have sometimes is that we have a situation is that sometimes the allocation of agricultural land, and agriculture sometimes is used as a means of social, a social experiment where you try and social empowerment, but sometimes you have to admit there must be some type of benchmarks which you establish to ensure whether or not those persons are doing the things that they need to do in order to retain possession of that land. We have had situations, and this has transcended many governments, in which persons are granted agricultural land and they make absolutely little use of them, right? Because they think it's that they want to get hold of the land, or sometimes the real objective is to have real estate that they could put some houses on. These are the kind of things. But we need to make sure that those persons we do not attract to the agricultural sector, and that we do not give them agricultural land, because at the end of the day, they are not fulfilling the national objective of trying to work to increase food production. And that is one of the points, first of all, I want to make. I also want to say, and to be fair, government this and previous governments have given some of those persons who came into agriculture just considerable benefits. I want to say, I mean, we've had a situation where farmers have been receiving, in some cases, free plowing. Okay, and now we have the lands plowed for them, get ready, and then they fall back into disuse, right? The thing is really, you have to look at sometimes, is that sometimes there has to be a measure of hand holding to the extent where you have to actually establish it for them. As a matter of fact, in other countries such as in Brazil, Brazil's agricultural success was not based on lack of investment, because what the state did, for instance, when they developed their ability to produce grain, wheat, and those other crops, it was based on the fact that government actually provided huge subsidies to those farmers in Brazil in order to establish their farms. As a matter of fact, we have in Guyana right now. Guyana now has the ability to actually produce corn, okay, and soya. But the Guyana government has used, of course, its newfound wealth in terms of oil to help these farmers in terms of procuring the necessary level of investment in order to do it. So these things come at a huge price. The point is, though, that government has prepared to actually put in that level of investment. And as you quite rightly cited, when you look at, for instance, the farmers of the United States and Europe, these farmers are the beneficiaries of huge subsidies, which are actually written into the law. So, and as a matter of fact, that is why, when you look at the whole issue of the WTO, and the fact that, countries are saying, many countries, especially developing countries, are saying that the rules need to be written. The way in which the WTO was constructed was, first of all, to basically safeguard those existing benefits that were given to farmers in the developed countries. So you have these green boxes that you have there, in which, and in these green boxes, what you have is a situation where the subsidies that are given to American farmers, the subsidies that are given to, say, European farmers, are actually given this, they are seen to be entitled to them as a matter of right. And this is despite the fact that those subsidies give them a superior competitive advantage to the farmers like in Barbados, who do not receive the type of subsidies that these farmers do. To boot, what has happened, of course, we remember that in our countries, we don't have the type of access to funds that, say, governments in the developed countries do. So the first thing that you have to consider is that sometimes governments in, say, the Caribbean do not have the level of access to the resources of, say, those governments in the developed countries that the farmers here locally can benefit from. But that is not to say that we do not still have a system in which of what we call an incentive regime. For instance, in Barbados, we have an incentive regime where farmers who are engaged or who want to engage in certain types of agriculture, they are given some rebates. For instance, if you wanted to invest in greenhouses or whatever, there's a certain rebate system that is there. As a matter of fact, for instance, if as a farmer you wanted to buy a spray can, or you say wanted to bring land into production or whatever, there is again a certain rebate system that is there, okay, that allows the farmers to go into the Ministry of Agriculture and claim the rebate. Maybe one of the things that we need to look at is maybe the system under which it is done. And of course, there needs to be a level of transparency and to ensure that people are doing what they do. And I think that in that regard, our civil servants in the Ministry of Agriculture try to do what they can. But there is that system. Maybe the thing is that we need to recognize is that maybe it is not promoted as much in the farming system as it should be, and that is something we need to take into consideration. So there is a system of subsidies, and one of the things actually I will tell you that we need to do, because I just saw the comment from Ms. Lucinda Aline, she spoke about Barbados and Barbadians. What are we doing to help ourselves? Maybe the first order of business that we need to do is to again try to re-familiarize existing farmers in the sector as to the range and quantity of subsidies that that have available to them that they can benefit from within the Ministry of Agriculture, okay, that they need to take up on, and recognize that if you go and buy a spray can for agriculture, and note it, for agricultural purposes in the Ministry of Agriculture, okay, sorry, not the Ministry of Agriculture, but to conduct agriculture, that you are entitled to a rebate on that spray can. And that is one of the things. And maybe what we need to do is to have a system in which access to those rebates can be provided very readily. And that in itself, if you invest in drip irrigation, for instance, that is something again that you can have put in place. So it is things like that. But I would also add that the levels of investment, therefore, and in agriculture today is great. For instance, we talk a lot about dairy production. I don't think sometimes we recognize that the amount of money that it takes to establish a dairy enterprise. And that is why, for instance, we have seen government in the past recently heavily invested in dairy production, largely because of the fact that it for an ordinary farmer is a big investment. It's a sizable investment. And again, one of the things that maybe we need to do is to look and see how our financial institutions, the existing financial institutions that we have in our country, can better assist farmers in terms of investment. Because I'll be very frank, when I look at the financial landscape in this country, it is not geared to help people within the productive sectors, including agriculture. Our financial institutions today, they are more quick to lend a person money for what we would call consumption. In other words, things that are non-sustainable, right? Than, for instance, when it comes to the whole question of lending for productive purposes, inclusive of agriculture. And this is what will make a difference in our economy, right? But you find that once you walk into a bank and you start to talk agriculture, or even manufacturing for that matter, somehow this is a lot of the applications seem to ring on deaf ears. And that is one of the problems, that we have this bias in which we are over investing in things like tourism. I have no qualms about saying this. We are over investing in things like tourism. We are over investing in the hospitality sector. And then the things that would actually earn the hard foreign currency that Barbados needs to basically address the issue of food security, we are not investing enough money in that particular aspect of it.
But let me ask you a question here, James, if I can, because you mentioned, let me try to be as generous as possible with persons who might fall into the category, persons who obtain agricultural property with the intention. I want to say that the initial intention is a good one, where they want to get into the agricultural sector and so forth. And then there seems to be a change of use. But is that not controlled in terms of the change of use? If we have, and I don't know how many acres of land we have in Barbados that is designated to agricultural development. I don't know how much that is. But if we have land that we want to say as the Barbadian populace is for agriculture, why does the planning, what is it called now, the planning and development ministry, change the land use to provide for the construction of I don't even want to say housing, because it doesn't treat to the type of housing that Barbadians need, to be brutally frank. I see quite a number. I mean, I don't know. I remember coming through the roundabout by Coral Ridge, heading toward the country,
That's
not the city,
disgusting
the country.
situation. Go ahead.
Yeah. And over on the left was a lot of, that used to be sugar cane. I remember as a child, sometimes I have to confess my sins. Sometimes I would stop and break a cane out there because it was all agricultural land. Now I see roads
Oh,
being laid in, development going on. It looks to me, I haven't been by recently, but it looks to me like a housing development. How is it that we can facilitate that with the desperate need we have, James, of sustaining our agricultural properties, agricultural land for this aspect of food security?
Because we have weak policies. No, we have strong policies, but the problem is that the political will. Sometimes we somehow don't know how to say no. That is the problem. We seem to want to acquiesce to those who have money and power in this country. And sometimes I don't blame them either. Because unfortunately, as Barbadians, we have a very short sighted view as to what it takes to make an agricultural undertaking successful. We have a very short sighted view. Because, while in retail business, in a year you're expecting to make billions, and we are very short sighted as the people now.